Our ancestors are always with us. And if you listen for clues, you'll hear them. Here's some examples in my life. A few years ago, I thought I'd try my hand at growing some tomatoes in pots. I had a really crappy backyard. I lived in the desert. I had plenty of sunshine, no water, and sand for dirt. So I put them in pots, and I put them out in the backyard, and I started growing. And I had lots of different varieties because I didn't know what I was doing, so I just grabbed several different types of plants. Well, one of the plants was a very dense, bushy type tomato plant. And as my tomatoes started to grow, they were inside of this bush and the plant was growing around them. And I thought, how in the world is the sun going to get in there and ripen those tomatoes? And clear as day, I heard my grandfather's voice. You forgot to cut off the suckers. You were supposed to cut off those suckers. And bing, like a light bulb, I remembered watching my grandfather in the garden trimming back the tomato bushes, cutting off those suckers so that it wasn't too bushy and the sunlight could get in to ripen those tomatoes. So that was a message from my grandfather. And then my grandmother was a lot more recent. I am writing a cookbook. I have lots of different YouTube channels, and one of my channels is a vegan plant-based channel. And so I'm creating a cookbook in conjunction with that channel. And it's called Celtic Cooking. For those of you who don't know, my husband's British. So I have to do a lot of cooking from England, Ireland, Scotland. So I'm creating a cookbook based on that cooking. Okay, so I created this recipe that I called Irish stew. And I made a video about it, and I wrote it in my cookbook, and then I typed it up into the cookbook that I'm producing. And my granny was Irish. However, she didn't call things by their Irish names. She made up names for things as she went along. So I was working on my cookbook one day, and I'm scrolling through all of my recipes to add more recipes, and I come across this recipe, and my grandma's voice, plain as day, said, "That's not Irish stew. This is Irish stew." And a picture flashed of what my grandmother called hamburger stew. That's what she called it, because we were poor, and it was hamburger instead of, beef most of the time, or lamb, as some Irish stew recipes call for. Granny called it hamburger stew, but that was the picture she showed me in my mind. So I went online and I Googled, and I saw lots of different pictures of traditional Irish stew. And sure enough, it was my granny's recipe, but she had subbed hamburger in place of beef or lamb. So back to the drawing board I went, and I created as close as I could to my granny's recipe without the hamburger, because this is a plant-based cookbook. And I made it for my family, and as I was serving it up, I told them this story about my granny coming to me and saying, "That's not Irish stew, this is." And my family loved the recipe much more than the other recipe that I had created. And my adult son stood at the table saying, "Thank you, Great Grandma." So they loved that recipe. And that recipe is now typed up in my soon-to-be released cookbook. So they will send us messages. Sometimes it will be very, very clear. We will hear their voice in our head. And sometimes it'll just be a memory. But it comes when we need it most. And that's just their way of saying, I'm still here and you live on through me, because we've shared those memories with them and we hold those things dear. And when we most need it, we'll hear them. Have a good day, guys. Share your little comments below if your ancestors have visited you.